Though we all know there have been significant divergences, we've discovered several plots that seem certain to be cut, but the showrunners have figured out a few ways to insert some of these after all. This will be one of the themes of today's book-to-show review of Episode 3, High Sparrow. I'm going to actually start us off with a listener question/suggestion that we've been trying to do a bit more of, take more listener suggestions, more questions to kind of give this more of an interactive feel. One thing that we've been noticing, of course, and one thing our attentions have been drawn to is the idea of combined plots, combined characters. The law of conservation of actors is a term that Lady Gwyn coined for us last time around. So this question comes from Corky94. Is Sansa going to marry a Then or Tormund marrying a Mormont, re the Alice Karstark plot? Well, to me that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I like how you're thinking. I like that concept. I like where your mind is. The idea of trying to find things that are in the books that the showrunners are going to try to use, even if they use it in a much different way. So hello again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the History of Westeros podcast, a podcast dedicated to George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. Nowhere do we combine the two more often or more thoroughly than we do in these book-to-show episodes. We're going to compare the show to the books as much as possible, be critical where we need to, give praise where we should. And joining me again is Yolkboy and Lady Gwyn from Radio Westeros. Yolkboy, why don't you start us off with your quick intro?
Hi, I'm Yolkboy. You might remember me if you've been following the series, if this is your first time. Yeah, I'm from Radio Westeros. And hello, with me is my co-host from Radio Westeros, Lady Gwyn. Do you want to say hello?
Yes, hi, Lady Gwyn here. I'm very happy to be back to talk about High Sparrow with History of Westeros.
Right on. Well, we don't have a Shay today, unfortunately, but we do have 3 of the same 4 we had last week, and it went so well that hopefully we can do at least 3/4 as well without a Shay this time. But she should be back next time. She's very busy with school, and that is, of course, an important priority. And this show moves so quickly, there's so much to talk about. She doesn't want to be involved unless she can be on top of things. I respect that, so hopefully she'll be back next time. You guys will tell her that you miss her, etc., because I know you do. All right, so let's dive right in. One thing that we are really trying to focus on with these episodes, along with just trying to analyze the detail and break down what happens and make these comparisons, we're also really trying to keep track of the differences, because it's actually a little confusing. It's easy to forget, for example, that in the show, Jon Snow knows Bran is alive, but in the books he doesn't. And there's tons of little details like that. Well, that's actually kind of a big detail, but there's tons of big and little details. And it's hard to keep track of them because the worlds are so similar. This might be getting easier a little bit because the show is diverging so much. But overall, it's still a lot to keep track of, still a lot of confusion. So hopefully we can make things a little simpler and provide some context. One other, like a good example of something smaller like that, little jokes that they throw in. Varys has a line, or Tyrion has a line, he says to Varys, where Varys says, "Who are you going to talk to?" And he says, "Someone who isn't bald." Well, he ends up talking to Jorah and getting captured by Jorah, who is bald in the books. So maybe I wonder if that was a little very, very sneaky joke that they made there, or it might have just been coincidence. I don't know. So, as I alluded to at the beginning, we've started answering listener questions. It's something we started just with our show-only review, and it's gone really well, and we want to keep that going. So if you want to have questions answered during the show, send them to us through Twitter or Facebook or Gmail, any of those things, and we will answer them if it's a good question, and your name will get mentioned. So fun for everybody. We all get to win. It's a win-win when you get your name mentioned, and we get to ask and answer a good question that everyone wants to hear. So, like we said, we like to go over everything really thoroughly. We like to put a lot of detail in these episodes. We go over things as much as we can. But even with that, because of all the things I talked about with so much to keep track of, we occasionally miss things, and that's why we have you lovely listeners out there to occasionally catch our mistakes and alert us to them, or at least to point things out that we may not have considered. It's a community endeavor, and we want to keep it that way. So, but the bottom line is to have fun, and right now there's a bit more negativity in the fandom with some of these show changes, and I agree with some of that negativity, but I don't agree with some of the others, and I think that it's important to keep things in perspective. And like, there's legitimate criticism, and then there's just griping, and there's all things in between. And everyone's opinion is valid, but I think it helps to have fun. I think it's better if we're able to have a perspective that's entertaining, because that is the bottom line here. This is supposed to be fun. We're all fans of Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, so let's try to have a good time. Let's geek out, dig into this latest episode, set aside any anxiety we have, even if just temporarily. At the end of the show, we're going to have some fun new features. We're gonna play a game called Weekly, or Watch of the Week and of the Week, both uses of the word week, which is basically a death watch. We're going to basically decide who we think is most likely to die. We'll each give our individual opinions. Yolkboy and Lady Gwyn will point out who they think is most likely to die, so will I. We're also going to play a few other fun games like guessing who's going to get grayscale. So stay tuned for that. At the end of the show, we've got a couple other fun bits. Fun bits? That sounds a little dirty. So let's start with the House of Black and White. I loved how it looked. The music was a really nice touch. It was a creepy scene. But the first thing we're really shown is the various gods and goddesses from all over the world. And Yolkboy is going to take us through that, give us some good detail on what we're seeing there.
Yeah, okay. Well, in the books, it's worth mentioning that there's 30 gods that Arya sees in the House of Black and White. But we're going to focus on the ones that we saw on screen. Okay, remember the kind of goat statue that we saw? This is the black goat, and this is from Qohor. In the books, Arya sees it, and the description is a shaggy black goat the size of an aurochs. And another one we see was a lion on the wall, if you remember that, and that is the Lion of the Night from Yi Ti. It says, the book quote is, beyond her was a man with a lion's head seated on a throne carved of ebony. And later it says, Arya saw that rich men preferred the Lion of the Night as their
that's never explained, but I wonder why they prefer that, why the rich men prefer them.
Maybe we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, so the drowned god was mentioned by Arya, and we think that it was quite hard to see because it was very dark, but there was one sculpture that seemed to be kind of driftwood with some seaweed on it. That's the best we could do when we had a look at it. So we're thinking that resembles the drowned god, which is, of course, the Ironborn god. Okay, and I think the very first one we see was a woman crying, a statue with real water coming out of her eyes, and that is the Weeping Woman. And that's from Liss, and the description says, Arya says, the Weeping Woman was the favourite of old women this time. Another one is the Weirwood Face. I'm sure we all know that that's the old gods, and I think the second time we saw that, when it was on the right of the picture, I think it was crying blood or crying the red sap that we know that the Weirwoods do.
Nice and creepy. Fits in with the scene.
Yes, it was a very creepy, dark scene. Good for the episode. And then we saw the Flaming Heart. This is R'hllor, but it's worth mentioning in the books the Flaming Heart is really exclusive to Mel. We don't see the Flaming Heart anywhere else apart from Mel and on Stannis' sigil, and presumably it's Mel that actually gets it put on there. So that's worth bearing in mind, that there might be different offshoots of the R'hllor religion. When we're in Volantis, we do not see the Flaming Heart, for example. Okay, and on to the next one, the Stranger. I don't think we actually, you mentioned it, I don't think we saw it on screen, but this is the death aspect of the Seven. I think it's mentioned. It kind of looks very feral, more animal than human. Okay, so there's all the gods we saw, or that Arya mentioned, and so we get around to the God of Many Faces. In effect, the God of Many Faces represents the death facet of each religion. In the TV show, this is kind of represented by the comment, "A girl knows his name," and as we know from season 1 with Syrio, there's only one god, the God of Death. So let's take a look in the books at this kind of god of death. In Cohor, this is a quote, sorry. In Cohor, he is the black goat. In Yt, the lion of night. In Westeros, the stranger. All men must bow to him in the end, no matter if they worship the Seven or the Lord of Light, the Moon Mother or the drowned god or the Great Shepherd. All mankind belongs to him, else somewhere in the world would be a folk who lived forever. Do you know of any folk who live forever?
No, she would answer, all men must die. And we see, shortly after, we see this man drinking water from a cup that Jaqen, we'll just keep calling him Jaqen for convenience's sake, or we could call him the kindly man. Either one fits.
Right.
We've all taken note of that separation by this point. And he seemed a little desperate, like he's getting ready to die. And Lady Gwyn, how does that go in the books? That's pretty similar, right?
It's similar. When she first comes into the House of Black and White, Arya sees the man sitting there and he's running his hand through the water. She sees the cup and she doesn't know that it's not just any old water, so she fills it and gives it to him. And he drinks it and goes off to lie on one of the beds that in the books they have these little stone beds for the supplicants. So of course in the books I think that was really showing that Arya was a real natural. You know, she comes in right off the bat and, you know, facilitates one of these people. So it was a little different there because in the show, of course, it's Jaqen that gives him the, and she's just watching and kind of trying to figure out what is going on. So now one of the things we should talk about is that the faceless man ethos in the books is actually a duality. They view it as a gift, but it's not. It can be for a sinner or for a sufferer. Basically, there's a quote that says, "On the day we were born, the many-faced God sends each of us a dark angel to walk through life beside us. When our sins and our sufferings grow too great to be borne, the angel takes us by the hand and to lead us to the Nightlands." So for the faceless men, this death is a gift for, again, either a sinner or a sufferer, something that must come to all men in the end.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I took note of some of those things myself, but it's neat to have those kind of refreshed, especially at this point in the show. And Yolkboy, you noticed something interesting, some more, maybe even a more obscure parallel that's perhaps speaks more to the nature of the series. You noticed a connection between the others and the Faceless Men.
Yeah, well, I've seen other people notice this too, but the others and the Faceless Men might be the perfect natural enemy to each other. Okay, the Faceless Men seem to hate slavery, remembering their roots and what the kindly man says. And, you know, with the kind of slavery in Valyria. And they also worship death as a natural end to life. So then think about the others. They raise the dead and then keep them as slaves. So, yeah, I think, I wonder if there'll be any tension, in the distant future between these two factions in the books, because they do seem like natural enemies to me.
I agree. That's a really interesting comparison. Certainly, the others would be perverting the idea of death, and taking that a step further. If the Faceless Men would be offended, say, just to use a generic term, by what the others are doing, consider all the other people and forces that are raising the dead. We have other supernatural things like the Relorists are raising the dead, and we have Qyburn, for example, kind of raising the dead.
Right.
There's this raising the dead magic comes up in a few places. So watch out, people! If you're messing with that, you get the attention of the Faceless Men. That's not a good thing.
Right.
So let's talk real briefly about the difference between Jaqen and the Kindly Man as it pertains to book and show. Listener Ryan 4B's F asks, are we sure Jaqen isn't the kindly man in the books? I'd say Yes, we're almost 90. I'd say we're 99% sure. And here is the proof of it. Lady Gwyn will go through a couple quotes here for us that kind of sets it straight.
Okay, so when Arya point of view, where she sees him, sees Jake transform, it says he passed a hand down his face from forehead to chin, and where it went, he changed. His cheeks grew fuller, his eyes closer, his nose hooked. A scar appeared on his right cheek where no scar had been before. And when he shook his head, his long, straight hair, half red and half white, dissolved away to reveal a cap of tight black curls. So then if we fast forward to the description of the alchemist in the prologue.
Feast for Crows, yeah.
Yeah, in the Feast for Crows prologue. We get a young man's face, ordinary, with full cheeks and the shadow of a beard. A scar showed faintly on his right cheek. He had a hooked nose and a mat of dense black hair that curled tightly around his ears.
So we have the same scar, the same nose, the same hair, the same full cheeks, and this person is clearly a faceless man, this alchemist, because he turns into Pate after killing him with the same poison gold coin that Arya kills the insurance man with later in A Dance with Dragons, I think that is. That could be part of Feast for Crows, but I think that's A Dance with Dragons. Mm-hmm. And takes Pate's place, which is the last thing we see in A Feast for Crows. It's like a dangling cliffhanger there. Oh, a faceless man has infiltrated the Citadel. It seems pretty clear that he's a faceless man, and looking really deep, it seems to show that he's absolutely Jaqen. Now, the possibility that he's not Jaqen does exist because, if these are people who can change their faces, there's nothing to say that some other faceless man couldn't have taken this exact same face. But that seems doubtful. It seems like this is Jaqen, and we're going to operate under that assumption. So, Yolkboy, there's another thing about Arya that is really important from the scene. You had some thoughts on Needle and how comparing her experience, Arya's experience with Needle, and her thoughts on Needle, recalling some things from the book that are really important that add some more strength to this scene.
Yeah, I do think that it was a strong scene, and TV watchers will kind of get it, that it's very important to her. But in the books, it really spells out why it's so important to Arya. Okay, there's a really brilliant quote I'm going to read out. "It's just a sword," she said. "Allow this time." But it wasn't. Needle was Robb and Bran and Rickon, her mother and her father, even Sansa. Needle was Winterfell's grey walls and the laughter of its people. Needle was the summer snows, old Nan's stories, the heart tree with its red leaves and scary face, the warm earthy smell of the glass gardens, the sound of the north wind rattling the shutters on her room. Needle was Jon Snow's smile. So you can see this is like the remnants of a Stark identity embodied in this blade. And I think it just makes it that much more powerful in the books when you read that, and you really realize what it means to her after everything she's lost and how alone she is there in Braavos.
That's one thing I particularly like about the show. You're totally right that the book gives it more power, and the two together are really, really powerful, because if you've already read that scene, or if you've have it fresh in your mind like we all do now, and then you watch that scene, it's even more powerful, because you get Maisie Williams' amazing acting, her facial expressions are perfect, and you get to know what this character is thinking about and how important it is to her, and that just makes it more powerful. Something I've thought about, and I've done a little bit of, and I want to do more of, is listening to the audiobook while reading it at the same time to see how that sinks in. And this is a bit of a similar thing, having the show you things that for some of us, we've had in our mind mental images of for literally a decade or more. And it's a real weird experience, usually positive, sometimes a little jarring, seeing what it's going to be on screen.
Right.
So, for example, another thing that's probably less jarring but different from what probably nearly all of us imagined was this view of the waif, who seems to be different in the show in a few ways that are a little fundamental. First of all, the actress's name is Faye Marseille, and she's been in The White Queen, so if you've seen that before, that might be where you recognize her. The one major difference is that she seems to be a subordinate here. Jaqen seems to be kind of in charge or above her in some way, whereas in the books they're both priests, they're both equals. And that's kind of subtle. I didn't even catch that my first maybe 2 times through the book. I kind of, for some reason, just assumed the kindly man was in charge for some reason, but that was not true by any means. They're just, if there's some sort of high priest at that temple, we haven't met him. But that would be kind of an interesting thing to think about. Is there some sort of, like, who's in charge there, you know? But another question that from the same listener, Ryan 4B's F, asks, are we sure the faceless men accept money as payment? Certainly, of course, they do in the books, and it's complicated and not thoroughly spelled out. But there hasn't been any indication of that in the show yet. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. So I would answer the question as no, we're not sure. We're not sure at all. That's sort of how it works in the books. But as far as the show, we're kind of just scratching the surface of this plot line, so we'll have to wait and see where they take it. Another thing that goes on with the waif is that she suggests that they're playing this game of faces, which in the books is like the lying game, which is when the waif and Arya take turns telling things to each other and reading each other's facial expressions to try to figure out if they're lying. And that is going to make, in the long term, think about the ramifications about that in the long term. If Arya's going to be an expert at detecting lies, that could play. It's hard to exactly imagine how that will play out, but I like the idea of her being able to do that in the future. That sounds cool.
Yeah, useful skill.
And the scene kind of closes out, well, not the scene, the series of scenes at the House of Black and White kind of closes out with them cleaning this dead body. At first I was thinking that this is mostly about them just getting accustomed to death. Working with bodies means that death becomes less of a crazy idea to them. It's more comfortable and normal. But there's also the thinking about this flaying room and that they have all the faces in the basement. And I don't know of any connections to the Boltons, and I wouldn't imagine necessarily that there are. But it's hard not to think of the Boltons when you hear of flaying and faces being cut off and a secret room with skins hanging in it.
Right.
Do either of you have any thoughts on that whole thing, or is that just something that we got to wait and see on?
Yeah, I think it's probably a wait and see, but I had the same, kind of train of thought when I was thinking about that, watching that scene.
And they're both in this episode. We see flayed bodies, and we see, for show, people who haven't read the books, they're not going to know about the flaying in the House of Black and White just yet. But it's coming, and of course we got, a face full of flaying from the Winterfell scene this time around.
We did.
Yes, it was very gruesome.
Mm-hmm.
The actors who volunteered to be flayed for that scene probably are regretting. Yeah. Wait, that's not what happened, right? Okay, so let's go to King's Landing. That's all for the House of Black and White in this episode. Like I said, we're just kind of scratching the surface with that subject in the show, and we'll just have to see where it goes. Very much looking forward to it, but there's a little less to analyze at this point. It hasn't really gotten into the meat of it. So King's Landing. Let's take a look at King's Landing. I think one of the most interesting things going on here is it's kind of a backdrop between this whole episode. We have both the Boltons and Littlefinger and even Cersei herself all kind of thinking or acting or relating to the subject of how the Lannisters are really starting to fall off. Their power is diminished. And Lady Gwyn, what are some of the major things that the Lannisters have lost?
Well, I think Littlefinger notes that Tywin, sort of held that Lannister power base together through sheer willpower. And now obviously he's dead. So what have they got left? Jaime's crippled. Tyrion's an outcast.
Tommen, he's a boy king. Not much there. Yeah.
Adorable. Less of a boy than. We'll get to that. Less of a boy than he was.
And then we have these fearsome warriors that they had, like the Mountain and the Hound. They don't have them anymore either. And speaking of, what do you got? What's the deal with the Kingsguard these days? That's kind of a subject that's really kind of fallen off. The show hasn't paid much attention to it. They're definitely there. We see them walking around.
They're marching around, but
the only ones with faces are Meryn Trant and Jaime Lannister, who's obviously not who's heading to Dorne right now. So, do you have any thoughts on the Kingsguard, or is that another just wait and see.
Well,
type of subject.
all I can think is that they obviously want a spare slot if a certain 8-foot giant comes back, which we're going to talk about actually.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't know. I think the reader's just supposed to kind of imagine that there's a Kingsguard. I think they're probably hoping no one picks up on it.
Maybe. I mean, there's always Loras. I mean, we don't really know what's yet to happen with him.
Will he make it in the Kingsguard or not? Yeah, that whole situation's funky because of they didn't. There's no Garland and no Willis, and it's a good place to point out that Tywin did threaten Olenna with that whole thing. With hey, then if you do that, I forget why he threatened it, what the conversation was about, but he said, yeah, if you do that, I'll name Loras to the Kingsguard.
Which would be a nifty parallel to what happened with his own heir, wouldn't it?
That would be, yes. That would be very cool, actually. That'd be a good show thing, a show parallel that the books didn't do, and I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
So basically, it looks like there's blood in the water, and the sharks are smelling it. The Boltons, the little fingers, like that's a house. All the little fingers around the realm. Or the Varuses of the realm. That's the no finger.
Right. Little finger there.
And even Cersei herself, who is in charge, which is, if you're a Lannister fan, you may not be happy that Cersei's the one running the show, but she's also kind of focused on internal power struggles, isn't she? She's not necessarily looking out to see the other dangers. And she even kind of shoots herself in the foot with the whole Kevin situation. I like that title, Master of War, that she tried to give him. It's a nod. It's yet another nod to the books that's not done in the way of the books. In A Feast for Crows, Cersei, it's a marketing technique almost. She's remaking the Small Council, using her own names that are basically Eastern titles. Instead of Master of Laws, it's Justiciar. Instead of Master of Ships, it's Grand Admiral. So I think this Master of War is like a nod to her changing the titles and making things up as she goes along.
Me and Lady Gwyn were wondering if it's a nod to a Bob Dylan song.
Yeah.
There's a song called Masters of War. So.
Well, I think George R. R. Martin, I think, is a fan of Bob Dylan. I don't know about D&D though. I'm not sure about that. So, but the thing that Cersei is most focused on, and this is a very subtle difference from the books that dawned on me very late last night, kind of almost at the last minute, and that is that in the books we see Cersei is paranoid about the Tyrells, about their encroachment, about how they're getting council seats and the marriage and all these other things, and they're making too many decisions. That's not really in place here in the show, even though it kind of seems like it is, because it's similar, at least on the surface, to the fact that she's got this huge conflict with Marjorie. But really, that's the only person in the Tyrell she's got a major problem with. I mean, she doesn't like Olenna, but she hasn't really seen Olenna as a major problem to this point.
Right.
Consider this, she gives Mace Tyrell 2 council seats. That doesn't sound like something you would do if you were afraid of Tyrell encroachment. That's seeing Mace Tyrell as a lickspittle, wannabe who is a sycophant, so that's why she's sticking him with that job.
Right.
But this creates another interesting possibility. Cersei versus Marjorie, what are her thoughts? Is she going to try to bring her down the same way? Is she going to try to do this, sex scandal thing? Is it leading that way? It's hard to say. So let's move on to where that happens. The High Sparrow is, of course, at the center of that plot line in the books. And let's talk about that. What was your guys' impression, just off the start, real simply, what was your impression of the way they portrayed the High Septon and the way they portrayed the High Sparrow? We'll start with you, Lady Gwyn.
Well, I thought it was great. Obviously, you had the High Septon in that scene in the brothel. It was classic HBO, but it was...
had to show us an ass, didn't they?
They had to. Not just one, 7. So
yes.
There he was with the 7.
And then his own, so we got 8 of them, I guess.
Right. Old man, but that was cool.
And then we got the Daenerys cosplay ass later too. So there was just so much ass this episode. A ton of episode 3.
Is there a brothel in every episode? Should we do a brothel watch? They fill their quota.
There's a lot of other Game of Thrones podcasts out there. We'll let one of them handle the brothel
Rifle watch. There you go, guys.
Rifle watch.
Our gift to you. Take it.
So
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, keep going. Did you have any other thoughts on the High Sparrow, or how about what are your thoughts on the new High Sparrow? How he's portrayed?
The new High Sparrow. I liked him. You know, it's funny because in the books, I didn't find the character likable.
Yeah, he's just so, I don't know, angry or just
too
zealous. I don't know what it's hard to. I can't think of the
sanctimonious, maybe.
Yeah, sanctimonious. Yeah.
Whatever he is, he's not likable, and this guy seems likable. He's out there, you know, helping the poor, feeding the poor, and seems pretty humble. So far, I'm sure, you know, that could change. But.
And Jonathan Pryce's charisma, of course, helps a lot. You got a great actor playing this role. I thought
he was brilliant. I thought he was really brilliant, and I thought that, you know, the humble side to him is gonna make it very powerful later on if what we think will happen is gonna happen.
Yeah. In the book, he's introduced as, you know, he's standing there with a scrub brush, and some other bishop another one of the most devout is on the ground scrubbing with his hands and knees, and Cersei is a little confused. She doesn't recognize this new person as the High Septon, and he says the smith finds work pleasing. So that's a bit of a similarity, because in the show he's not doing work, but he's feeding the poor. He's doing you know, the role of a different one of the gods, basically, and taking care of people. I guess it's kind of like the father or the mother, a little of both.
Right.
Now, in the books, here's a good thing to keep track of, a good thing to note the differences on. In the books, that Cersei gets rid of the old High Septon because he was appointed by Tyrion. That was her, you know, she just realized that one day. She's like, oh my God, that High Septon was appointed by Tyrion. He's got to go. Yeah. And she has, I believe, Osmond Kettleblack go and kill him in his sleep. And in the show, it's a little more. Cersei is so dastardly. She just he's a terrible hypocrite. So she just throws him in the black cells, and no one's going to say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. That's kind of like a moment where everyone agrees with Cersei. But then she comes around and starts to look like she wants to make this alliance with the High Sparrow, and we all, having read the books, we know that's probably not going to go very well. But I have an interesting question here. What do you guys think about Lancel? Do you think Lancel was acting on his own, or do you think the High Sparrow directed him? Or is that just a kind of a mystery that we'll have to wait and see on? I'm really not sure.
I'm not sure, but I think what's important is that Lancel is acting because of the presence of the High Sparrow. That maybe he's had some inspiration, whether it's a direct order or whether you know, he is acting of his own accord. I think that, you know, the really interesting thing for me is it just because this new character is there in the kind of epicenter of this kind of new wave of you know, zealot, religious, whatever you want to call it.
Well said. And I think you're right. I'm kind of guessing they don't have a lot of. He's not just giving out orders. He acted like it might have just been the way he was presenting himself to Cersei, but he certainly was acting humble. He rejected the title of High Sparrow, kind of made a joke about it, and we can see from the trailers that the Faith is clearly going to get some power. I guess we can expect that as part of making an ally with them, Cersei's going to allow them to arm. I really wonder what the early implications of that are. If she's not fully against the Tyrells and she's more focused on Marjorie, is that similar enough? Is that going to allow the plot to progress kind of the way it does? Well, since Marjorie is kind of the focus of that, of her infidelity, of her, you know, dilly-dallying around, allegedly, that could still fit in very nicely. It could work out, but it could also be it could also spin out of control. There's some evidence from the trailers about Loras, and Loras foreshadowing in the first episode about how he's too open with his gayness. And the High Septon, something that Ashea looked up that we didn't mention in the first episode, we were kind of under the impression that we weren't sure whether the Faith in Westeros is against homosexuality or not, and she did find evidence of that. We couldn't find any before, but it has turned up. So apparently that is a thing. Apparently that is canon, that the Faith are against homosexuality, maybe not to the degree that the fever pitch that we see in the real world, but they definitely don't look on it kindly. So that it will fit as far as a potential plot line, Loras getting in trouble because they think he's a sinner, and that's certainly an assault on the Tyrells. And
I wonder if making this High Sparrow, humble. He seems like a nice guy. Cersei will make a mistake. She'll trust him when she shouldn't. Perhaps he's going to turn out to have another side. At the moment, we're kind of, like Lady Gwyn said, oh, he seems nice. But it could be disaster for the Lannisters and the Tyrells. And, if it's anything like the books, then it will be.
Right. She misjudges so much in so many people in the book, so it wouldn't be a surprise that they carry that through here.
Good points. Okay, so but what we see here, part of one of the undertones here with Cersei's move here is that she's looking for new allies. She's looking for people who are powerful, and she recognizes this High Sparrow as having power because so many people look up to him. And Cersei has her flaws, but she's got a nose for power, and she recognizes this guy as a potential player, as someone who can move things around, someone to have in her corner. As you said, Yolkboy, that's probably not going to work out for her because we sort of know it's coming in the books, and it may work out differently, but it probably won't go well. But she's looking for other allies, isn't she? And one guess that we think we have is something that's revealed in the next scene, which is with Qyburn. She comes in on Qyburn and says that she wants him to send this message to Littlefinger, and she wants him to make sure he understands the meaning of the word immediately. Now, she doesn't seem angry. She doesn't seem upset. I don't think she knows about Sansa. She doesn't know he's gone to Winterfell, that's for sure, because we find out later the message went to the Eyrie and not to Winterfell. So, now here's the thing. Here's the theory that we've come up with that I think is really interesting. First of all, she left the position. She gave those positions to Mace, 2 positions to Mace. All the other small council seats are taken. So if it sounds like she's trying to bring Littlefinger back, I think that's what the immediately means, that she wants him to return to King's Landing immediately. She's looking for more allies. She's looking for help with how Margaery is totally defeating her in the battle for Tommen, because Cersei has no hope of defeating Margaery when Tommen is just smitten and is just discovered sex, and he's a 13 or 12-year-old boy, and he's having sex with this beautiful, experienced woman who's also emasculating him and turning him against his mother. She doesn't really have a leg in that fight because Margaery just has the upper hand so massively there. So she's looking for other allies, both politically and on this personal level. And I wonder if what she has in mind for Littlefinger. The one job that she's left open is Hand of the King. Of course, this is nothing like the books. Well, not yet anyway. Maybe that could happen later. I don't see it. I doubt it. But I really think that's a strong possibility that we'll see Cersei attempt to name Littlefinger Hand of the King. What do you guys think of that? Do you think the ramifications of that are just is that shocking? Is that crazy?
No, I think it's a really good idea, Aziz. I think when we were, preparing for this broadcast, and you came up with this, we were kind of talking around it, and then I think you nailed it. I think that we were set up last week when someone said, "Who's the Hand of the King?" It made it very clear. Like with the Kingsguard, they don't say who's in the Kingsguard because they don't want you to think about it, but they really want us to think, "Hey, there's no hand."
No hand.
And we get this letter, and I really think that she could be asking, and I doubt that Littlefinger wants to. Well, we'll come to Littlefinger, won't we? But I doubt very much he's going to take her up.
Well,
yeah, it's a tough call, right? He doesn't want to get found out, but he might be tempted by the idea of being able to manipulate things from the inside, or that position of power might be just so tempting for him.
Right.
As ambitious as he is, he wouldn't lightly. I agree with you that he might not take it, but he's not just going to instantly reject it either. Lady Gwyn, what do you think?
I think I had a lot of thoughts after we talked about it last night. I think it's a great idea. And I liked the sort of parallel of Littlefinger being in Winterfell and getting this invitation to be Hand of the King with Ned.
Ha!
Because there was Ned in Winterfell, and he got this invitation that wasn't really an invitation. I mean, I think it depends, I guess, who the request comes from, but sometimes it's more of a command than a request. So it's just a neat thing that occurred to me. But the other thing I thought of was, with regards to the books, There's, well, I guess there is, Kevin was the regent.
Yeah, and Mace was the hand.
And Mace was the hand. So, I mean, there's some room for this, for some sort of fluidity in the small council. The small council, I think we might have talked about this, is very, very shrunken by the end of the beginning of Winds of Winter.
Yeah. And Mace Tyrell is a good bit different too. He's a lot more inept, and he's pretty inept in the books, but he's got a big ego, and he blusters and talks over people, where he doesn't have nearly as strong a personality in the show.
Right. So you think even in the books there's room for maybe a place for or a suggestion to put Littlefinger on the small council.
Yeah.
Not that I necessarily think so, but
so
anything's possible.
And this ties in, like you said, Yolkboy, about the whole Kingsguard thing and how they're kind of keeping our attention away from it. It was a bit of a deflection. Cersei said that she wanted to leave that position open. She doesn't need a hand of the king. But that was before her falling out with Kevin. And before...
Exactly. That's what it meant. It brought our attention to it, and then it was the same scene, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Kevin marched off back to Casterly Rock, so it seems very suspicious to me.
So she's losing a major ally, and then it gets worse because we have all these scenes with Cersei and Marjorie where Marjorie just needles her relentlessly, bringing her down about her age, about her connection to Tommen, about her new title. Queen, are you Queen Mother or Queen Dowager? Just all these just...
Oh, and the wine.
Yeah, and the wine. Yeah, it's just nonstop. Every sentence out of her mouth is a takedown, is a put down of Cersei, and Cersei just manages to keep her cool. But in her mind, she's like, "Oh, I am gonna get you. You just wait." Like if we were inside her head in the book, it would be just like steaming. Like there'd be steam rising from the pages.
Right.
But like I was alluding to, though, this scene kind of combines these things. We have this potential for the small council to fill out with the new hand of the king potentially, but we also have the future of the Kingsguard on display here. Yolkboy, what do you think about the potentials for Sir Robert Strong this season, or maybe later, or?
I think it could be this season. Why not? Why not? This actor that's been under the sheet. They're paying him. I wonder if it's the real Mountain actor. If they hired him just to sit under the sheet for a season.
Hey, that's an opportunity for them to have a fourth actor for the Mountain. They're like, yeah, well, we had the first three, and then we had a dude under a sheet, and then we brought back the third guy. And...
Right.
I heard Sean Bean. Sean Bean said he wanted to come back, so perhaps it was him.
And how creepy! Growing in his creepiness, isn't he?
He is getting creepier. He didn't even flinch, and maybe some of you watchers did when the creature under the sheet suddenly rose. I think he heard he was in shackles.
He called it friend. He said easy friend.
Easy friend.
Friend.
He's just so calm about it.
Yeah. I'm busy writing a note here.
So this takes back to the end of last season, doesn't it? Where we saw the Mountain's body, and he kind of had tubes and stuff coming out of him. And that was a bit of a hint of what was to come. But at this point, with the rat experimentation, with the dwarf's head, we can get the sense that we do in the books now that he is a true kind of classic horror character. in the books, Cersei says he looks like everyone's favourite grandfather, which I love. Cersei judging people again on their looks.
Fail.
Yeah, he's failed, and I think you saw when he's experimenting with the rats, and he kind of gets blood everywhere. He doesn't seem to care. I think that we're slowly going down that road of Robert Strong, and I think the big question is, no, I'll leave that to Lady Gwyn. What's the big question in Lady Gwyn?
The big question is whether. Well, Cersei asks how the progress is coming, and we assume this is in some allusion to the head that they need to send to Dorne. So the big question is whether this is a dwarf's head that they're going to send to Dorne. They are noted to be unnaturally large, or whether it's Gregor's actual head? So are they pulling a fast one on Dorne and sending them a beetled down dwarf's head, or are they actually sending Gregor's head and then Gregor has a dwarf's head sewn to his body?
It's going to be a mystery. Yeah.
That's what we all want to know.
I really am excited to see what he's going to look like on screen. What they're going to do. Usually they do a really good job of coming up with good costumes. Sometimes the costumes don't necessarily fit what we picture, but they pretty much always look cool, even if they're different.
Yeah, imagine I think it's described this really pristine white enamel armor, bigger than any that's ever been made or something like that.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see. And I imagine him walking, quite like a robot. Because it's obviously some kind of necromancy. He's obviously hasn't got the human touch.
Yeah.
Imagine him being quite robotic and just stood there for hours without needing the privy.
Well, speaking of things coming back to life, let's head far, far to the north, to the Wall, and where we've got some interesting scenes, some interesting parallels that are different from the books, but I think a lot of things are going to work out a little similarly. They're just going to take a different path to get there. We start with Stannis, Jon, Davos, and Ollie with the whole Jon Stark scene, we'll call it. Now, I think a very interesting undertone here is looking ahead to who's going to turn on Jon. We are almost positive that's going to happen. It happens in the books. Which Night's Watchmen are going to turn on him? And I'm pretty sure that one of them is a little scary. Our warden in the north, the bastard of Starkville, Jesse asks, is Alistair Thorne the new Bowen Marsh? I'm not so sure he is. I think he's going to be sent out into the wild like he is in the books. I think since he's the first ranger, that really seems to be happening, and he's going to be sent out into the wild, and that might be where he meets his fate. I think who I'm really worried about becoming part of the team Bowen Marsh is Ollie. Little Ollie is his steward now, so he's in a position of interest. He's learning things and he's hearing all the secrets. But the bottom line is when the question of what to do with the wildlings comes up, and Jon says, "Yeah, I think most of my brothers would be happy seeing them dead." The camera goes right on Ollie. It's focused right on him. We're reminded that Ollie hates the wildlings. Again, they killed his parents. Of course, he hates them.
Yeah.
So if Jon starts bringing the wildlings in and tries to, concatenate the wildlings with the Night's Watch to bring them all together, we know some people are going to that's not going to go well for her, and I'm pretty sure Ollie is going to be one of those people that particularly is upset with this, that sees this as a betrayal, and that could turn very, very tragic. What do you guys think about that? Do you see that happening with Ollie, or do you think it'll be somebody else, or maybe something that maybe else is going to be in part of the picture? I
definitely saw the Ollie thing. It was. I think did we talk about it last week?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. And then when and I wasn't sure, but when this week, when they showed that scene, that look on his face.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
What are some other things that you noticed from the scene about what's going to happen with Jon in the future, tied into what we think is coming from the books?
Well, I think the scene with Stannis and then Davos really. While it does diverge from what's in the books, it sets Jon up to take the wildlings south. First, when Stannis says, "I leave their fate to you," so obviously now it's up to Jon to do whatever he's going to do with the wildlings. Set them free. I guess they're all being held prisoner still.
Yes, Stannis mentions to keep your enemies close, or shouldn't keep your enemy close. Jon says that, and Stannis says, "Yeah, it's that person who says that hasn't had a lot of enemies," and that to me that's actually a little parallel to the books. Melisandre's the one who gives Jon that warning in the books, and a couple of Melisandre's lines are divvied out between Stannis and Davos in the scene.
Yep.
But one key thing that is lacking, and that is the big difference that we pointed out in the middle, or rather at the beginning of this episode, is the fact that Jon is aware that Bran is alive, and he's not aware of that in the books, but he doesn't bring it up here. Stannis is looking for a Stark to install in Winterfell to rally the North, and that doesn't come up. Do you think that is an oversight by the showrunners, or maybe Jon doesn't want to tell Stannis? Any thoughts on that, guys?
I would.
That's a tough one, huh?
It is tough because the big part of me wants to just say it's kind of an oversight or a plot hole, because they could have easily had him mention it to Sam, even if he wasn't going to say anything to.
Yeah, they could at least have given us the peace of mind of knowing that they thought of it.
Right, that's covered.
So we'll see, though. It might be something that comes up a little later, but because that whole plot is interesting with Davos, right? What is Davos taking? The other thing that Davos takes Mel's place on, Lady Gwyn, tell us about that.
Well, his comment that Stannis likes you, he sees something in you. That's definitely a Mel thing.
Yeah.
But there's still that critical difference that exists, which is the same as in the books. Mel is firmly focused on what's north of the wall, while Davos is the more pragmatic one. And in this scene, when he's talking to Jon about the Night's Watch vows, the shield that guards the realms of men, he's not pointing to shielding them from what's north. He's pointing south and sort of setting Jon up again to be heading south.
This got my This set my crackpot alarm, my tinfoil alarms off when I reconsidered this scene, because one of the big mysteries of A Dance with Dragons is the pink letter, and there's a lot of theories out there. And I think one of the things that makes it a great mystery is how viable so many different theories are. The theory that, of course, what we're presented with is that Ramsay wrote it. Of course, there's very solid theories on people like Mance writing it, or even someone like Stannis or Melisandre writing it, and those work. You can't just completely eliminate those possibilities. There's some holes in those ideas, but there aren't huge holes anywhere in any of those theories. So I wonder how they might incorporate that same thing, because I don't see a pink letter exact type scenario happening in the show, but I think they want to give us some kind of mystery, or at least touch on the same circumstances. And so when I think of Stannis and Davos trying to get Jon to go south, I think of that, because the whole idea if the pink letter was written by Stannis or someone loyal to Stannis, that would be why. It would be to get Jon to come south, to add more manpower to Stannis' cause, which is something that Stannis arguably needs very badly. Mm-hmm. So, with that in mind, this gives just a little bit of extra credibility to the possibility that maybe Stannis or one of his people wrote the pink letter to try and get Jon involved militarily in Stannis' side, even if just circumstantially or accidentally. Mm-hmm. The other go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that Mance could have written it, but it was in his pocket when they burnt him.
That's why. That is why we won't see it.
Oh, that's so sad. But the other interesting factor here is that Davos is here at the Wall, which gives us some cool scenes. He gets to chat with Jon and other people. But of course, in the books, he's off trying to find Rickon. So how is that? That's kind of why I was thinking of Bran, and kind of why I'm thinking a little bit of Sansa. Right? Sansa's the one who's in the north. She's the Stark in the north right now. Mm-hmm. If they're going to rally around a Stark, it could be her, and it could be using the combining plots theory in the way that the showrunners try to streamline things. Why bring Rickon back, this young child actor, when you can just have them bring someone else there to rally around, like Sansa, who's already there?
There she is.
Yeah, so Sansa could be taking Rickon's place as the rallying point in the north for Stannis. That's really interesting. So we'll have to see where that goes. Now, here's an somewhat unrelated question, but I think it's a good question because it speaks to these characters in play here. And listener Derek Krettel wants to know, why did Davos take onions to Stannis in the first place? Why did he turn from his smuggling ways and become a good guy? Because Davos is a great man, as we all know. He's one of the most popular characters, one of the most widely liked characters, one of the fewest characters, like the shortest list of negatives, like you listing the good qualities, the bad qualities, is like Davos does not have very many bad qualities. So why? But you think about that, and you're like, well, how could this guy have ever been a smuggler in the first place? You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, I was just going to say that, I've got a very practical answer to the question. That supply and demand. Smugglers concerned with supply and demand. When people are starving and you've got a boatload of onions, who do you think's going to pay more in the end? the well-fed people at the King's Landing Bakery, or the about to eat each other? I think as nice of a guy as Davos is, if he's a smuggler, it will be a very pragmatic, practical decision for me.
Yeah, the price of onions would be, you probably couldn't find a better price for onions on the entire planet at that point. And he was right, it got him a knighthood. It also cost him his fingers, but another aspect of this I thought is worth consideration is that he's starting to have children. He's a bit older, by the time he quit smuggling, and you see this in when he's dealing with his sons and how his sons they just want to forget that they prefer thinking of their father as a knight. They don't like thinking of his life before that, because to them that's demeaning. It's a lower social status. And Davos, like a lot of human beings, I think he may have just wanted a better life for his children. So it's a little of both. I think you're right. I like your ideas there, Matt, but this is Game of Thrones. It doesn't have to be one reason.
No, I think that they work together. I think that,
they do.
He could want the best for his children, but again, it's a calculation. Well, hold on, if I deliver this, then I might be in a better place.
Yeah.
I could do a great deed here. I could do a great deed, or I could just give these onions to a bakery. It could be a bit of both, I think.
I doubt onions could be smuggled anywhere else. Though. I mean, it wouldn't be smuggling. It's like onions, contraband, onions.
Seems like an odd cargo.
But he found out, he thought he was hauling a load of diamonds, and he opened it up, and there was like, wow, these are onions, not diamonds.
Now
how am I going to make my money? How am I going to make my money back on these things? I guess I'll.
Stannis! For these onions.
Find a starving castle.
Yeah. So let's move on to another scene at the wall here. We've got the Shield Hall, which it's named that in the books. We'll go ahead and call it that because we don't have another name for it. It's given that name because knights. The wall used to have a lot more knights in it, and they would hang up their shields on the walls. And there's just tons of different sigils and shields all over the place in the books. So it's kind of a neat concept. I don't suppose that they took that step with designing it for the show. I don't blame them. That sounds like an expensive thing to come up with, all those different sigils all over the walls. But it would have been cool to see that. But a little bit of tragedy foreshadowed here. Something we all know is coming. Maester Aemon is on his way out at some point this season, most likely. And it's already foreshadowed because it's briefly mentioned at the beginning of the scene that Aemon is too sick to be at this meeting. There's an episode called Kill the Boy coming up later, which is a reference to Jon Snow having to, not having to become the Lord Commander and stop being, just a steward or a young man. He has to kill the boy inside him and become a man. That's what Maester Aemon says to Egg, a.k.a. Aegon the Fifth, as he himself is taking the Black and heading north, because that was his brother. So I think what we'll see is Aemon's deathbed speech, which we'll talk about more when it actually happens in the show. It's a wonderful speech. It's really sad, and we'll cover it a little bit later when it comes up, because I imagine they'll give him something. But I think I'm predicting right now, the Kill the Boy speech is going to be his deathbed speech instead of his stuff about Daenerys and all these other things, and Princess that was promised. So. We talked briefly a bit already about how Alistair Thorne is probably going to be a similar role in the show or in the books compared to how he's going out in the wild as a member of one of these ranging parties. One question is, will Thorne see it the same way? In the books, Thorne sees his new mission as being sent off to die. Do you guys think will Thorne react similarly, or is there something else in play here? Because Thorne's a good bit different in the books, or in the show, than he is in the books. He's a little bit more sympathetic. He's a little bit more charismatic. He's a lot more charismatic. Still kind of an ass, but he's a lot more likable. I'm wondering
if there's a little bit of mutual respect between Jon and Alistair in the TV show. I don't know if it's my imagination, but some of the glances they give each other, I'm not sure whether it's pure loathing. Or whether there's a modicum of respect. I mean, Jon has Alistair was probably expecting to be thoroughly demoted when Jon became, Lord Commander in the TV show, and he gave him a good position, really.
He did.
Who knows? He might see it as a kind of conspiracy. But I think that John, I think underneath that there might be a bit of mutual respect.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think I saw some hints of that as well. I'm not sure that's what's going on, but I definitely agree that there's some hints for it, and it might be something that is a good difference from the show to books. That would be kind of interesting to see them have a rivalry based on mutual respect that is grown out of a rivalry based on just hating each other from the get-go. That would be kind of an interesting twist for what we'd be expecting.
And of course, it's interesting. It's interesting in the books if there'll be a big issue about respect in their kind of relationship if Jon turns out to be a Targaryen, because he was a Targaryen loyalist.
That's true. That's why Theon's there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great reason to keep Alistair alive in both. You know, in both mediums, because the dynamics between them two can bring a lot.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that at all. The Targaryen connection. That's a good point. So then we have Jon's real first test of sorts as Lord Commander. Slynt, kind of basically behaving. This is very similar to the way it's carried out in the show, or in the books and the show. It's very similar, except for the iconic line that several people expressed disappointment that the line wasn't there. In particular, our Knight of the Forums, Darren Tucker, wanted to know, why was there no Ed, fetch me a block? We were all hoping for it. Lady Gwyn, you can take us through the scene and why that was omitted.
Well, I have to admit, I don't know why it was omitted. Because
what? You don't know why? You didn't talk to David and Dan specifically about this?
No, and I'm one of those who gets really disappointed when they omit iconic lines for no apparent reason, because it's I've watched that scene a couple times and I thought they could have easily rearranged it ever so slightly with no great effort and included that the same way they could have had Littlefinger say "only cat" when he shoved Lysa out
instead of "only your sister."
Instead of "only your sister," which sort of gutted it. This is just something that book lovers have, these iconic phrases that they want to hear, and it's disappointing when they're gone. But
yeah, I had a. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very, but other than that, it played out relatively similarly.
Yeah, I liked Jon's struggling a little bit with the decision. He knew what he had to do, but I liked Kit Harington did a good job of his face betraying how conflicted he was. He knew he had to cut Slynt's head off, but he really didn't necessarily want to, even though he knew it was correct and it was his job, and Slynt earned it for basically being a traitor, and before that being a coward, which is akin to desertion.
Right.
So I would say that this kind of replaces that. There's a similar tension in the books, but what it is, Jon thinks he's going to hang him, and then he says, "I'm going to hang you" or something, and then you get his internal monologue, and he thinks this is wrong, and he stops. So you get this tension of a pause. He's not going to do it.
Right.
And then, of course, what he means is, this is wrong. I'm going to chop his head off, like my Lord Father used to do.
Yeah.
So it's a similar tension in the pause, and I think they were just trying to represent that, because they obviously couldn't do that with the internal monologue and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was really Kit Harington again with some quality acting. After he does the deed, he's got this look on his face. He's breathing heavily. He's a little shocked. He knew he had to do it, but he found it all very distasteful.
Mm-hmm.
But this was actually foreshadowed really, really early in the books, wasn't it, Lady Gwyn?
Oh yeah, one of my very favorite little bits of foreshadowing. Way back in Game of Thrones, Sansa is looking at Janos Slynt while he's still in King's Landing, and I'll just read the quote. Sansa stared hard at his ugly face, remembering how he had thrown down her father for Sir Ilyn to behead, wishing she could hurt him, wishing that some hero would throw him down and cut off his head.
Some hero!
So her bastard brother turns out to be a hero.
Yeah, a lot of people have taken that quote to a little farther and said, some hero, hey, as in the last hero?
The last hero.
Yes.
Right.
So, very, very sneaky there. I really like it. Very well planned ahead there, George. Good job. Good job.
Yeah.
So speaking of Sansa, let's move on to what I was calling the road to Winterfell in our show-only review, but I think is more accurately reflected as just Moat Cailin. It's a couple of different sub-scenes here at Moat Cailin. We have a major decision point, Sansa and Littlefinger. Littlefinger presents her with this idea that she's got to go marry the Boltons. First she thinks she's marrying Roose. Then she realizes she's marrying Ramsay and doesn't really know who that is. And apparently, this is interesting, the showrunners planned this change to Sansa's plotline back in around the season 2 time frame. They had this in mind way back then.
Wow.
And in some ways, I understand it. I wonder. I liked it because, and I understand their decision because they're always faced with the challenge of using. They want to use their best people. They want to use their best actors and actresses, and they don't want to confuse the viewers too much by introducing new characters. Jane Poole wasn't in the show. It's just not. You can't just insert her, and I mean you can. It would be a little awkward. So it's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. They can either insert this new character and have her do this, or they can use Sansa for it, who already doesn't have a lot to do based on where she's at in the books, and they want to use this dynamite actress who's really popular. Mm-hmm. So I kind of understand. Like a part of me is like I wish it would be a little like the books, but I really understand the circumstances and why they're using Sansa in this role, and I've really come around on it, to be honest. I kind of like it. What do you guys think in general? Without commenting too much on the specifics, we'll get into those specifics as we talk about this, but just the idea of Sansa being in this role and what it might do for your enjoyment of the show, or not.
Well, I like a surprise, you know. I kind of... On one hand, the big changes can be jarring, but another part of my brain is like, you know, this is quite fresh to me, you know, and I start thinking about the different dynamics and possibilities, and then it's quite an exciting change. I think you've got the fear factor for wanting to kind of protect Sansa, and you've got the political intrigue. I think that I wouldn't put my money down now, but I think it might turn out to be a decent change. Probably one that book purists are kind of going to hate. But
yeah.
As far as kind of TV show only people, they might actually enjoy the way this is going. We'll have to see though. It could turn out nasty.
I also like another aspect of it. It creates this Littlefinger Roose Bolton scenario. These two great schemers kind of going at it, being like uncertain allies. That's pretty cool. We didn't get that in the books, and I doubt we ever will. So that's I like that. That creates a new situation. Lady Gwyn, what about you? What's your take, just from a high level, on this whole situation?
I really thought I was going to hate it when we started getting hints, early on.
Me too.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, I think I'll be okay with it. I think it will be interesting, be different, but with the sort of eyes on the long term, I think Sansa's going to end up at Winterfell. So if they have to get her there, and all those other factors we talked about, combining plots and stuff like that, it makes sense. I'm not that offended by it as it's playing out.
Right on. And of course, we still have plenty to see. They could make it even cooler, or they could mess it up somehow. Well, it's another wait and see thing here, but it definitely presents a lot of interesting opportunities, a lot of things. It does. I like what Yolkboy said as well about it creating tension and just exciting, and we get to think about new things. It's a whole new thing to analyze. Mm-hmm. Takes our thoughts new ways.
Who doesn't want to see Sansa start playing the game? Who doesn't want to see her start, using her initiative and using some of a kind of strength that she's built up by this kind of barrage of abuse she's taken over the seasons. Who doesn't want to see kind of Sansa take the bull by the horns? Whether she'll be able to actually do that with Ramsay and Roose around, we don't know. But isn't it interesting to think about that Sansa might actually be able to do her maneuvers now?
That's a perfect segue as well to how she made the decision so quickly. That's one complaint I saw that I at first agreed with, but have come around a little bit on it. That whole scene played out so quickly. She's like, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it, and then she just, like, within seconds, she kind of just flips around. Mm-hmm. It may have been a little quick. I give them a bit of a pass on that because it's TV, and they really they just have to, time is always of the essence. there's no point in having her stand there thinking about it for a while. That's not necessary. So I'll give them a pass on that. It's a little awkward, but I'll give them a pass. But like I said, there's some complaints on that. Some people thought she made the decision too quickly, and some people thought that she would never go along with it. Well, I'm not saying you guys are wrong, people who have that opinion, but think about it from the other perspective. What is her other choice? What else is she going to do? Is she going to just stay with Littlefinger? Everyone knows that's bad news. Brienne knows that. We all know that. Sansa, why not? We can't put that past her. Sansa's getting smarter. She's probably pretty realizing that maybe while going with Brienne wouldn't have been great because Brienne can't protect her, or maybe she did want to go with Brienne but just couldn't because of all the guards around. It seems to her that she knows that no matter what she does, she's going to be in great danger. At least this gives her a chance to, like he said, like Littlefinger said, she's got a shot at going home and getting revenge on the people that did this. She doesn't have a lot of choices. Rock and a hard place. That's what she's got.
And the pull of Winterfell, we'll come to this, but she was recognised. This is a home. This is... Lord Eddard, her father, did so much for the North. She must be slightly aware that she might have some people on her side. It must have crossed her mind, maybe. I think that the pull of Winterfell, for a lot of reasons, must have been big for Sansa.
Okay, so let's talk about Littlefinger's perspective on this deal. Listener Vincidius asks, what does Baelish get out of this? What is his end game? Yolkboy, you had one thing that we have a couple of ideas. You go ahead and tell us the first one.
I've reading the books for a long time. I thought that Littlefinger's end game might be Winterfell. We know what happened in his childhood, that he was kind of really disempowered and, in his mind, probably fucked over by the Starks. And he got a nice scar and everything, and it lost the woman he loves. Maybe, a part of him kind of wants to be a Stark, and Winterfell might mean more to him than taking King's Landing. You don't know. I really think that him with Cat, the next best thing to Cat, in Winterfell, might be his kind of wet dream.
And I think that another potentially, you mentioned Cat, that is possibly part of his angle. I'm doubtful that his whole angle is related to Catelyn, but revenge for her death is a possible angle here. He knows Roose Bolton was involved in the Red Wedding, and he's been pining for Catelyn forever. He even in the show, it's specifically mentioned by him that he's saving himself for her. So I'm doubtful that his whole plan here is just to get revenge on Roose Bolton. But there's something very fishy. And Roose Bolton knows it. Roose asks all these questions. He's like a terrible ally. He's like reading his letters, and I want to read I need to see all these things you're saying. Why are you talking to the Queen? Yeah, and Bolton himself is not in a great position. He's got Stannis to deal with. He admits that the North could rise up against him. We all know, and he knows himself. Littlefinger doesn't know this, although it's possible he does. We don't think he knows that Bran and Rickon are out there. So Bolton's position is tenuous, so Bolton asks Littlefinger, hey, why are you allying with me? Because he wants to know, what do you get out of it? He also wants to know, and Littlefinger doesn't really give him a straight answer. He deflects. He says, well, all ambitious moves are a gamble. You and I can bring down, last time the North and the Vale teamed up, they brought down the great dynasties. He's basically saying, don't think about my motivations, think about what you can get out of this. Because he doesn't want him to think about his motivations too much, because I'm guessing there's something sinister going on. I can't imagine that Littlefinger, it's Littlefinger. Of course he's got something else in mind. Of course he's got other plans. So we'll kind of have to see. Now, listener L. Marby suggests that another thing in play with Littlefinger is this whole outsider status and how he wasn't, as a child, he wasn't good enough to marry a Tully bride. It wasn't just that he was in love with Catelyn. It was that he was in love with the idea of marrying a noble girl and belonging to the nobility, and he wasn't allowed to belong. He was not good enough. So his whole life, a lot of his psychology is based on that rejection and how he's trying to prove himself worthy or better in a lot of ways. So that's a very good point. He could be just trying to show these nobles that he's better than them, that he's worthy, more worthy, perhaps. Now, as far as Warden of the North goes, now Bolton is Warden of the North, which is a potent title. It has a lot of meaning behind it. We have a question from our warden in the north, again, Jesse Parker, the bastard of Starkville, he asks, who are the players for the throne? It's a good question to kind of, from a high level again, to kind of a review question, say, who are the big players in the throne, for the throne, in the books versus the show? In the books, there's characters like Fagon, who seems like he'll be cut. Now, again, I just use that name for convenience. We know who you're talking about. I don't necessarily, I'm not 100% sold on him being fake, but I just use that name for convenience. Same with Euron. He's a potential candidate for the throne, but he's not even in the show at this point. Lady Gwyn, if we go back to the beginning and look at how it was presented and look at how it's changed, it's kind of the scope has really changed in general, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I mean, it started out as a Starks versus the Lannisters. You know, classic good guys, bad guys. Now we have one is powerless and the other is rapidly falling apart. So
Yeah.
where do things go from here?
And it's hard to guess from where the books are going because so many different things are happening. We have Stannis' army is much larger. The Wildlings are different. The Boltons with the Vale situation is totally different. So it is a bit hard to predict where it's going. A lot of things are different. And like Matt said, like Yolkboy said, that's fun. That's different. At least we get to feel anxious. We get to not know it's coming. I really like that. Mm-hmm. But of course, the big thing that's missing from Littlefinger's plan is he doesn't know that Ramsay's a psychopath, does he? So how is this going to work out for Sansa? We can be pretty sure there's going to be some sort of mistreatment in Sansa's future. It's doubtful it'll be like the Lady Hornwood level of mistreatment where she ends up eating her own fingers, either because she was starving or because, like Theon, the pain of having your fingers flayed off is so much that you want to bite them off. Maybe it'll be a bit like Jane Poole, at least on the surface. Probably, I mean, hopefully not too similar. No dogs, please. We don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't know how they would film that anyway. But
oh my God, did you have to go there?
Yes, I did. So we've talked about what we think about this from a high level. Now let's talk about one of the other main wild cards that's going to be a part of this whole northern situation, which is also not in the books at all, and it also is set up here at Moat Cailin, where this is all sort of germinating, this big plot line is coming, and that's the Brienne and Podrick situation, who are following close by. Mm-hmm. Yolkboy, talk to us a bit about what happens in this scene with Brienne and Podrick.
Well, it does bring in a lot of stuff from the books. Her tale about Renly is actually taken from 3 different parts of the books. Okay, first you have the knights at Bitterbridge who all kind of pool their money and they're kind of gambling with each other, winner takes all bet, who can take a maidenhead, okay? So that was kind of resembled in the TV show. And then there's the line about Brienne the Beauty, which in the books is the Red Ronnet story, and Red Ronnet probably affects her in her childhood more than any character, save only perhaps Renly, who was mentioned as dancing with her in the TV shows, and this is what happens. This is why she kind of gets hesitates to use the word obsessed, but she develops quite a crush on Renly in the books, I think, and perhaps in the TV show. There was more hints that she knew that he was gay, and it wasn't a crush, more admiration. But I think in the books, I'm not sure that she has figured out his sexuality. Yes. So another similarity I noticed is that there was that bit where Pod was. They were talking about training Pod. This actually also happens in the books too. I do have a quote. You may call yourself a squire, she told him, but I've seen pages half your age who could beat you bloody. If you stay with me, you'll go to sleep with blisters on your hands and bruises on your arms most every night, and you'll be so stiff and sore that you will hardly sleep. And Pod, in the books, Pod's like, yeah, I kind of don't want that, but I do. He's up for it, and it was nice to see some semblance of that being represented in the TV show as well.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So, and Lady Gwyn, what about Pod's story there? They both kind of tell their origin story in a sense, and who are they?
And this one is also even more so than the Brienne one, pretty much straight from the books. The whole, he served a knight. The knight stole a ham, and then he was going to hang for it. The interesting change was in the books. It was Kevin Lannister who saved him and sent him to serve Tyrion. In the show. He said it was Tywin.
Yeah, pretty small change, yeah.
It's a small change. To me, it seemed utterly out of character for Tywin. But
yeah, I agree. Tywin's not big on second chances.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe they're probably counting on not everybody watching is as deep in the details about Tywin as some of us are. So.
It has also been established that Tywin is big on nobility being like a step above and getting being allowed to get away with things, so to speak.
Right.
So
that's mention the family name, yeah.
So that's something at least, and that is basically how it works in the book. It's because he's a pain, Kevin gives it. So that's sort of a carryover. Now, as far as the one of the major parts of Brienne's story is her idea that she wants to get revenge on Stannis. In the books, the notion of her getting revenge on Stannis just seems so far away. Like, she's physically so not anywhere near him, not heading in that direction. She seems in danger. There's a lot of questions about whether she'll even survive the Winds of Winter, whether Stannis will survive it to even have a chance. Like, if Stannis is dead, Brienne's got no chance to get her revenge personally. Also, the concept of Brienne getting revenge in the book is a little bit more muted. It's not something that she's necessarily talked about as much more recently. At first, she's like, I want to get Stannis, but it's kind of fallen off a little bit. She doesn't think about it a whole lot in her own point of views. So
yeah, it's kind of like Arya has this list, doesn't she? And then things become less. She forgets people who faces over time, and it seems to become less important sometimes. Well, Brienne, I think she just mentions it that once in the books, right?
Yeah, I think so. Now, yolkboy, you noticed. Yeah, go ahead. You noticed something about this possible thing here that we're talking about with Stannis and Brienne, and what are your thoughts on that whole thing?
Well, I just wanted to say that in the book, something I noted was in the House of the Undying. There's a set of 3 called Slayer of Lies. That Dany's a Slayer of Lies, okay, and one of the things seems to be Stannis. So I was just mentioning that. In the TV show, this is Worry of the Week, okay? We've had we had so far Bronn, Samwell, Brienne, and we had another one.
Varys and some others.
And Varys,
and there'll be more
every week. Yeah, there'll be more. We're gonna worry.
Yeah, stay tuned for the end of this episode. We'll go through that in more detail, who we're most worried about. And we'll update it every week. But for now, Yolkboy's got this very specific
Tune in every week just to worry about characters dying and going to die. Okay, the worry of the week has to be Stannis after that line from Brienne. The fact that, she seems to be headed up that way, and the fact that they need to cut down on characters. So, could they do it? I don't see why not. It's difficult because we don't know what Stannis' future is. We might think we do. We might think that he's gonna, kick some butt in Winds of Winter, but we don't.
It could come to a. Yeah, it could just come to a screeching halt all of a sudden, and Stannis is kicking ass, and then all of a sudden, no more kicking ass, Stannis. Now you're dead.
He does like to George does kind of like put you on a high, and then surprise you and slap you in the face. So yeah. I expect to be slapped in the face. It's much easier.
Right.
Now, listener,
I recommend it.
Listener Sarvesh C asks, will Brienne take Abel/Mance's role, including getting caught by Ramsay? That is a great question because this alluded to what we talked about at the beginning of the show about looking for opportunities for plot lines that seem cut to not be cut, just to be taken up by other characters. And this is a very, very good idea. The possibility, other than the fact that it's scary and we hope that awful things don't happen to Brienne, but she's getting added to the Worry of the Week because of this idea, as well as we already had her on the Worry of the Week last week. We already worried about her. So It's just I'm just double worried about her now because this is very true. This is a very good call. Mance goes into Winterfell to try to rescue fake Arya, and he's got his own plans as well, potentially. But we won't speak to that too much. Brienne obviously doesn't really have her own plans. If she goes to Winterfell, it's all about rescuing Sansa. She doesn't really care about much else, unless it's a chance to get revenge on Stannis in the meantime. But so I can see it going a couple of ways. Maybe Brienne's death will be that she saves Sansa but dies in the process. She helps Sansa escape but gets captured by Ramsay and is tortured to death by the worst person to be tortured to death by.
Yeah. Well, how about this? How about if Brienne does have a bit of difficulty, it's more like the biter situation where she gets some kind of, mutilation or, something physical happens to her, but she gets away, so it's a bit of both.
That would be
kind of worry of the week, but it's a bittersweet worry of the week, I think.
Yeah, if she survives, we can handle her getting torn up a bit. If she survives, that would be that's better than just her dying. So,
right.
I like your idea. I think that my theory is just as strong, or Sarvesh's theory is just as strong, giving the listener credit where it's due. But I prefer to see her survive.
Yeah.
Now, another listener question from Garnted. How is Brienne going to get past Moat Cailin? She says she's going to go around. And this raises an interesting question. First of all, I think the show is just playing a little loose with that because there is no way around. Besides taking ship. Now, so that could be it. Taking ship would be relevant. That would be a valid way to get there. The problem with that, as far as where things are, Moat Cailin is on the west, is kind of the west. They're on the west side of Moat Cailin. If they take a ship around the west side, that's Ironborn territory right now. That's risky. Taking a ship from the east, that could work. Now, the reason that Littlefinger and Sansa didn't take ship, presumably, is because they didn't want to have to go through White Harbor, which is where they would have to go through, and that's just too many people could see them. White Harbor is one of the most populous locations in all the Seven Kingdoms. They're bound to get spotted. They don't want that, so they're sticking to the road where they can be a little sneakier. So, I guess, like I said, I think the show is just playing loose with going around Moat Cailin. I don't think there is a way around it, but they're allowed to change the geography a little bit, but they've also shown that they really don't have a lot of respect for the time passing. Like, the best example being Asha sailing to the Dreadfort somehow. All the way around Westeros, up the Weeping Water. That was an
entire season, so
that was a little bit silly, but that's one of the show's lowest points, I think.
She's still trying to get back, actually.
Yeah, she needs Gendry rowing for her. Okay, so in the interest of time, we need to keep moving. Let's go to Winterfell. We've covered some of the stuff that's happening at Winterfell because these things are all related. The road to Winterfell, these plots are all intertwined. But we get a shot of Winterfell. We get to see what's happening. We see this rebuilding. We see one of the interesting pieces of detail they chose to show us is some random guys carrying raven cages, which is interesting. That's an interesting little thing to show us as being set up. That the message is going back and forth is going to be important. The control of information is really important because Sansa is there, and it's only a matter of time before news gets out that King's Landing and Cersei and everybody finds that out. Who knows when, but it's bound to happen eventually. But with Roose and Littlefinger controlling the information, they're both good at that. They can at least delay the inevitable. But we're immediately confronted by these other kind of gross things, the other things that remind us of who's in charge there. We see these flayed men. So Lady Gwyn, take us through that.
Oh, so the flayed men. It's flayed man and flayed woman. And we find out in the very next scene that it's Lord Kerwin and his wife and brother. I assume maybe the brother is the one in the cart. With the raven pecking at his chest.
That raven seems to enjoy. He had a good old mouthful, didn't he?
Yeah, I did.
They train them to eat the bodies. They're not real bodies, are they?
Kerwins are tasty.
No, we covered that. So in the books, of course, Lord Medgar Kerwin died at Harrenhal of wounds he had received at the Battle of the Green Fork. Arya sees him there. That's one of those kind of like, oh, almost so close moments. And a new lady of House Kerwin is Jonella Kerwin. So her brother was killed I think it's her brother, Clay, was killed in Winterfell, shot through the eye with an arrow. Maybe by Ramsay, or definitely one of his men.
Just some guy. Some
So
Dreadfort man.
some Dreadfort man killed Clay Kerwin. So there's sort of similarities there, and definitely set up to be as Ramsay says, the new Lord Kerwin paid his taxes. So Lady Janella Kerwin in the books is sort of being very acquiescent to the Boltons as far as we know. We haven't really seen much of her, but the Kerwins are, of course, one of the most powerful of the Starks' bannermen. They're also the closest nearby.
Yeah, they're very close. I think it said it's only a few days' ride.
Yeah, so my idea that the reason why in the books Janella Kerwin has not appeared on the page is because she would obviously recognize Arya Stark.
As Jane
Poole, she would probably recognize Jane Poole as Jane Poole. The Kerwins were that close.
That would explain why she wasn't invited, indeed.
So she was not invited. She was sent home. So she was probably perfectly happy to be not there with Ramsay.
Yeah, she's like, darn, that's the best non-invite I ever done.
Yeah.
So now we also have the scene that is a little bit similar to the books. We have Roose telling Ramsay how terror you can't just use terror all the time, and this is similar to how he's threatening to turn Lady Dustin into a pair of boots, and how Roose is just kind of disgusted with that. He's like, look, terror has its place, but you just can't do that to everybody. That's just stupid. That's not going to work. You have to be more nuanced. You have to strategize. You can't just. It dates back to what we talked about in the first episode about how you can't just break down these obstacles and these barriers. You have to work with them. You have to strategize. You can't. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes just going full force and being ultra violent is the right play, but it's not going to work always. He goes through this, explains why alliances are important, builds up to this the most important type of alliance, the most powerful type of alliance is a marriage. But all throughout this, as Sansa is introduced as the possibility, we know that the person listening is Theon, and he's just sitting there listening, and he knows who Sansa is. And Yolkboy, you had some thoughts on Theon in this scene?
Yeah, Theon listening in. Do you know what? He's a great actor, isn't he?
He really is, yeah.
Alfie Allen. He didn't say a word in this episode, but he had an enormous presence, didn't he?
He did.
So I thought, well, isn't it getting slowly set up that Theon could help Sansa? And I'm not just talking about a like for like with the kind of Jane Poole situation here. I'm talking about them doing something else, but something redemptive, doing something. He's listening in. He's at Winterfell. He's ruined this family and this place. What could he do? Could he empower Sansa? Could he save her? Could he screw over Ramsay behind his back? Who knows? Who knows? But I think, again, like we were saying, this is part of the interesting dynamics that Sansa might have a few hidden friends coming out of the woodwork, and a chance for Theon to get some redemption. I think he needs to. One question we discussed earlier, that in the show at least, Jon knows that Bran's alive. Whether that was just a kind of mistake that's created a plot hole, we don't know. But will Theon tell Sansa that Bran's alive? And this time, will it actually have more meaning? Will it be reflected on? Will Sansa get some strength from it? Will Theon not mention it? I don't know. I don't know what they'll do with it. But Theon does know that what he did and what he didn't do.
So that's good to mention Theon, and there's also, like you said, some other people coming out of the woodwork. But there's this one important character that's very barely appeared on the show, but they give her an important look. They give her just a brief amount of screen time, and we're wondering what's in store for her.
Right? We're talking about Miranda. Well, we saw her, I think last season we saw her hunting a girl, and if I remember correctly, it showed that she was pretty jealous of this girl, and they fed her to the dogs. It was pretty gross. Mm-hmm. She seems like the female equivalent of Ramsay, but with a kind of jealous streak. And you see Sansa kind of getting matched up, and there she is. You know, the camera really panned around, and it was on purpose. It showed her. So what I'm wondering is if she is jealous of Sansa. If she's an early, you know, Ramsay will play nice for a while, but I think that this Miranda girl will make some kind of maneuver against Sansa. And that can go one of two ways, whether, you know, does that with Ramsay's blessing. I doubt it. I think that if she goes against Sansa, Ramsay might actually, you know, not be too pleased with that, given the matches of so much importance.
Yeah.
So if I was Miranda, I'd be very careful about the jealousies here, because I doubt Ramsay is a kind of loyal person to his girlfriend and stuff.
And as I pointed out earlier in this episode, remember that the showrunners have planned for this in season 2. So I'm very sure that scene with Miranda last season where we see how jealous she is was definitely, they had that in mind for this arc. Otherwise, like, who else would it be for? Like, her jealousy is pointless. Sansa's the only woman that's come into Ramsay's life that matters at all, and clearly she's a threat. So I don't know where they're going with this, but props for the showrunners for planning something this far in advance and finally putting it into play. Well, I'm curious to see where it goes. I think it's hard to connect these two, but one of the things that happens in the books is Mance's spear wives get caught and various bad things happen to them. Some of them maybe get flayed. This could be a very loose parallel to that. If they turn on Ramsay and get caught, they could be tortured much in the same way these spear wives were. They're of course coming from a much different direction. They're different loyalty and all that, but it could play out sort of similarly. And Yolkboy, you also know that some of these
has to get flayed. Somebody has to get flayed, don't they?
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not.
And
no, we don't want it to be Sansa. I'd rather it was jealous Miranda than Sansa, if anyone. And okay,
but there's the other helpers, aren't there? There's other people that might be a benefit to Sansa.
Who's going to come to Sansa's aid? Whether it's Miranda or whether it's actually from, you know, Ramsay or some of these dreadfort psychos, who knows? But we mentioned Theon. Okay, she might find a friend in Theon, and he knows a lot of stuff. He's worth a lot for the stuff that he knows, like we said. But we did get a glimpse of a serving woman who came into showed Sansa a bedroom. I think it was a bedroom, and she said, "Welcome back, Lady Stark. The North remembers." And that was like a boom. It was quite a quiet line, but there was a silent boom for kind of book fans and stuff.
Yeah, it was like it was almost like we weren't necessarily expecting to hear that line. It's a big iconic line from the books, but you don't hear a lot of people calling for it. Like, when are they going to say the North remembers? We're all expecting Ed, fetch me a block. Well, at least we got the North remembers.
Yeah, we
got a little something. They didn't give us the line we most wanted, but we got this, and that was a little bit of a surprise. So yeah, I agree. That was I pumped my fist when I heard it. I was like, yeah, the North remembers. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Another something that's missing from this whole Winterfell scenario, that's a huge part of the Winterfell scenario with the books, is this whole other family that we all hate. Lady Gwyn, talk about them for a sec.
Where are the Freys? You know, I mean, there's no Wyman Manderley, so, you know, some of them came with him, but some of them came with quite a few of them, actually, many more of them, came with Roose.
Yeah, like 2,000.
2,000. He brought a force, and it seems like in the show he just brought Fat Walda, and no sign of the other Freys, so apparently we won't be getting to see any of those great sort of dynamics with Freys and Northerners. But is there, you know, could there be any role there for Fat Walda? Is she going to maybe take the brunt of that?
I've wondered about that. I had a few crackpot ideas. Another thing that's missing is Wyman Manderley. Is it possible that an obscure, subtle connection is being made here, instead of Manderley being the one to be the spearhead of revenge from the inside against the Boltons? Is it now going to be Littlefinger? We've already spoken to Littlefinger and his potential desire to get revenge on Roose because of Catelyn. It's hard for me to imagine Littlefinger serving people pies with people in them, but hey, Fat Walda could make several pies.
She's good at you.
I don't. Can we have Ramsay eating?
Walda seems very lovely on the TV show. She seems very friendly. I think that weird. Wouldn't it just be just such a kick to the teeth, but also hilarious in a very disgusting kind of way if somehow Roose Bolton ate Fat Walda instead of eating Rhaegar Simon? It would probably have the same kind of darkness that the actual Frey pies do in the books.
I really want them to do it, and it's another one of those, like, people talk about it so much. There's so many memes, and like the Frey pies is like a big like talking point. I hope they don't. I don't think they would miss out on that, but maybe they just can't fit it in. So
I hope they at least nod to it. So even if they can't, fit the whole thing.
Yeah.
In there,
So this was my this was another late addition to our talking points. I was like, you know what, that's missing. Is there going to be any pies coming up? Are we going to see any cannibalism expressed?
I know if there's a feast and they show big pies on the table,
everyone, my eyes are going to get really big. I'm like, oh, there they are. There's people in that. Soylent pie is made of people. And if Roose doesn't eat Walda, maybe Ramsay eats Roose, or I don't know.
That would be the best.
I think you're into this cannibalism idea, aren't you?
Well, yeah, it's my enjoyment of exotic foods.
Surely cannibalism makes good television.
Yeah. Well, speaking of exotic foods, let's go to the exotic location of Volantis. That's our final destination for this episode. We're making pretty good time here. We've got a little bit left. We've got just enough time for this section and our credits, so let's do it. We've got Volantis in the box. Tyrion and Varys are in the box together, and Pentos to Volantis is a really long way to go by road. Of course, the way the show deals with long distances, most people just cross these long distances just like that. So this but for some reason, Tyrion and Varys' journey is just taking a lot longer. Mm-hmm. But we get to Volantis, we see one of the themes of this episode, which is identity, and we see all these slaves who their identity is defined for them, their tattoos on their faces, and they go through what all the different identities and different types of tattoos are. And then we run into this Red Priestess. Her name is Rila Fukushima. She's a somewhat famous actress. She's in the show Arrow. She was in the movie Wolverine, which is a bit of a spoiler. Not that I told you that she was in those roles, but she's a little bit important as an actress, which to me says we haven't seen the last of her. That was not a one-shot scene for her. I think we'll see her. She clearly seems to be taking the role of Benero, the High Priest of the Red Temple in Volantis, who is, the one who first names Daenerys as an actual religious savior. Mm-hmm. So, yolkboy, talk to that a bit. That's a really interesting development.
Oh yeah. Well, in the books, it's kind of, I think we're getting hints that the kind of these, can we call them Reds, the R'hllor supporters who
sure.
Seem to be hand in hand with the kind of the slave class in Volantis. We get a few hints that they want to help Dany, and we also told that in Volantis the population is overwhelmingly of slaves. So if they rise up, and Benero seems to be kind of stirring them up, then Volantis has got a problem, but that might in turn be a help for Dany. Volantis have sent boats to attack Dany and to in the Battle of Fire, but again they're rowed by slaves. So I think we can take a little bit of a guess at what could happen to those boats and how useful they might be.
Indeed.
So I'm just wondering how that translates. We're being shown Volantis, if there is a kind of secret army for her or something like that. I don't know if her kind of liberating the slaves is causing a lot of problems in Meereen, but in Volantis it might create this uprising, as I said. So will Dany get any benefits? What do you think? Is it possible? I mean, in the TV show, will Dany benefit from Volantis?
I believe so. I think you hit the nail on the head with that point about how this is an allusion to the people. These are future supporters of her. She's already a hero amongst the slave populations, and of course, they're hearing rumors about her, and rumors are always blown out of proportion. So Dany sounds like this incredible, like huge ultra savior figure, when in reality she's kind of things are a bit of a mess. She is that figure, but it's not. She doesn't just have everything under control. She's got plenty of problems to deal with. So it's going to take her a while to maybe resolve those things and get herself to Volantis. And as we know, the books haven't gotten to that point. We don't know what's going to happen in Volantis, if she even will go there, or whether Volantis will kind of come to her, so to speak. So it's very interesting, but I agree that it's part of her, you know, she's sort of the stallion who mounts the world. That prophecy is she's the one fulfilling that prophecy. She's the one gradually uniting these different peoples of the world. She has the multinational army, Dothraki, Myronese, you know, all the different Giscari races, you know, Westerosi, you know, sellswords from a variety of nations. She's the one doing all these things. So a couple of questions from listeners based on this scene here. From Bill Davis III, are Bonero, Makoro, and the Dusky Woman all being rolled into Rila Fukushima, this Red Priestess here? Is it using the law of conservation of actors? Is that what's happening here? I think that's a good possibility there, Bill. I think you might be right. Certainly, we've already alluded to the similarities with Bonero. The way she stares at Tyrion and kind of gives him that look, that's kind of Makoro. That's kind of along the lines of Makoro telling Tyrion that he's in the middle of all these dragons and important events. Well, any other thoughts on the one thing I'm not sure about is the Dusky Woman. I can't see how she fits into that role, or how, but it's possible. Do you guys have any thoughts on that at all?
I don't see it yet, but I mean, anything's possible. I mean,
I should have asked for clarification there. Yeah.
After all, so
they can do whatever.
I would definitely say that the Bonero Makoro thing, and who knows? I don't think I think they will probably also alter the character their own way this time. I mean, maybe he suggested the Dusky Woman because, you know, she's a female. Yeah. And I can't really make connection with the Dusky Woman myself, but I haven't thought about it that much. So might be.
I feel like the likely cut of so much of this Greyjoy plot means that she's probably cut as well, but she might still have a role to play. It's hard to say what her ultimate role in the books is, so that's kind of we'll call that a wait and see.
Yeah.
A similar question from listener Matt Heinzman. Does he wanted to know if we thought that the Red Priest staring at Tyrion, which we already mentioned was a parallel to Makoro, does that confirm or hint at the Tyrion Targaryen theory? I'd say it kind of does.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, you know, that Makoro, one of those Makoro quotes is a key piece of evidence that's used in the Tyrion Targaryen theory. So.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to go against you and say that no, and we don't know why she looked at him yet. On the TV show I'm talking about, we don't know. We might find out that, you know, she just senses that he's special. Whether you believe in the Tyrion Targaryen idea or not, I mean, she doesn't looking at him because of that reason. He could be a big player, whether he's got a drop of dragon blood or not. So okay, well, that's good. We've got dissenting opinions there, so we'll have to see how that comes out. I like it when we don't all agree on everything. It gives us different potentials. So we're very friendly though. We argue about it afterwards. So
we get into fistfights. But we don't hit each other in the face. All the bruises are below the chest.
Right.
Here.
Yes, not the face.
No, not the face. Not the face.
Well, YouTube start now.
Okay, so we are running a little short of time, so let's move on here. Let's go to the matter of grayscale, which has now been brought up twice in two different places. And both those scenes refer to each other. Tyrion mentions that prayer is worthless versus grayscale, and we're confronted with grayscale while also confronted with Selyse, who is a zealot, you know, a person whose prayers would be worthless, a believer in R'hllor. That might be a bit of a nod to each other. Who do you guys think is going to be in the show, or rather in the books? John Connington is the one bringing grayscale to Westeros with the potential for Shireen's to also awaken. Well, that potential still exists in the show. Shireen's can awaken somehow. But who is going to be, quote-unquote, patient zero? Do you guys have any thoughts on who that might be?
No.
Tough guess. Let me throw one out here then. I'll throw an idea at you then. I think Varys. Okay. It could be Varys. Varys is now detached from Tyrion. We were worried about him dying, So I'm a little less worried about him dying because he wasn't killed during this split from Tyrion. So he might be the one he might be returning to Westeros. He might be the one with grayscale. I can't think of anyone else. Through process of elimination, I don't know who else it could be.
I think Tyrion. I think in the books, Tyrion could get grayscale. So maybe maybe they're going there in the TV show. I think that he had that experience in the Sorrows.
Yeah.
And if he turned to stone, he'd just be like a little gargoyle. And remember how he entered. Early on, we see him. I've got the quote: "Looking for all the world like a gargoyle." And then later on in game, the gargoyles are described. Perhaps once they had been lions, but now they were twisted and grotesque, which is how Tyrion's described. I think that this, rather than who's going to replace Jon Con, it could be all about Tyrion's longer term arc, that he might get grayscale. That's my feeling on it.
That's a good thought. I wonder where he would get grayscale, because the Sorrows are they're well past that. Volantis, it's on the other side of Volantis, but they could play with the geography. It could happen on the way back. He could get grayscale somewhere else. The demon
is it sexually transmitted? They could get another brothel scene in.
Oh my.
So, Stone Woman.
Now, Lady Gwyn, tell us what happens next. Tyrion runs into who we all knew it was coming, us book readers. At least we assumed it was. We saw his face in that scene. We knew it was coming. And he says, "I'm taking you to the Queen." What does he mean?
I think we all know what that means. Tyrion does not, and probably if you haven't read the books, you do not. I think it's willfully ambiguous.
Yeah.
I'm sure Tyrion thinks he's, as he does in the books, that he means Cersei. So of course he means he's taking him to Dany. And we'll have to see how that journey goes. I just want to say that I got the biggest kick out of the Dany cosplaying whore. I really, but then they showed her, and there was Jorah, sort of sitting there looking sullen, Jorah. And she was in the background, and I thought, I wonder what he thinks of her.
I wonder how many times he's paid for her. He's probably bankrupted himself.
Crossed my mind, but or is he?
I've heard a lot of people suggesting that we're going to see that cosplay turn up a bit too much now at conventions and stuff. And
oh my god!
Yeah.
And I don't mean the sad Jorah sitting in the corner cosplay.
No, we mean the
Just a little bit of material cut out the butts, wasn't it?
Yeah, there'll be prosthetic butts, I think, but I think we'll see that. It's amazing how much so we talked about themes in this episode, and identity, revenge, journeys. Asses, apparently, is
was a big one, yes.
The big one. Aha! I see what you did there.
Aha!
Yeah. Okay. So, I one last thing about Jorah and Tyrion before we get into our end credits and our fun summary, getting it all together, and our worries for the week, is that we have all these pairs of characters that travel the countryside together, wherever the countryside happens to be. Podrick and Brienne, Arya and Sandor, etc., etc. I'm looking forward to Jorah and Tyrion together. That could be fun. So yeah. I don't know how long they'll be together, but I assume they'll be together for a little while, and that should make for some good TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both depressed. Hopefully they'll cheer each other up.
Yeah, they're strange bedfellows in that regard. They're both sad sacks. They're both really messed up about something to do with a woman,
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice that the whore that Tyrion picked had, brown curly hair? It was very much looking like Shay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is probably why he couldn't perform.
Mm-hmm.
So, so let's talk about some summary here. Again, the themes of service and submission and identity and revenge were all throughout this episode. We have characters big and small, like Cersei, all the way down to the little ones, like some of the Night's Watch brothers, or some of the members of the faith. And we also have a theme that was introduced to me offline by listener Janine, the Dragon Walker, who suggested that there was a lot of journeys in this episode. We have Sansa making a big travel. We have Varys and Tyrion traveling their huge journey with Jorah as well. We also have journeys of a less traveling nature and more of a metaphorical nature, where we have people coming of age and lots of growth, and we of course have the rise of the faith and these other things. And potential journeys like Cersei maybe going back to Casterly Rock. She probably won't, but it's at least mentioned. So let's talk about our worries of the week as we wrap things up here. Characters that we are most worried about dying. It's very scary, isn't it? Right now, my personal biggest fear is I'm worried about Bronn. I'm a little worried about Jorah. Very worried about Brienne. A little worried about Roose, as much as I can be worried about a guy I'm not a big fan of. I like the character, but I don't like him. I'm less worried about Varys, as I said. Sansa, Arya, Dany, Tyrion, safe as always. I have no worries about them. Yeah. All right, Lady Gwyn, what about you? Who are you worried about? Who are your worries of the week and the week? Okay, my worries of the week, definitely Brienne.
Okay. The others, we sort of carrying over Brienne and Stannis, and carrying over still Bronn and Barristan from last week,
besides the characters that I said are safe, are there any characters that you think are particularly safe? Maybe others think are more likely to die.
No, I don't really see anyone as. Other than what you mentioned, I agree. I agreed with those four. I don't think anyone...
No one is safe. Notice I omitted Jon because we all know what's coming for him.
Right, I was going to put him in my, most likely to
die. I'm going to say I feel safe with Brienne. The anxiety of last week's Where of the Week is just been washed away. I feel Brienne, she's going to have a hard time. She might get some. Pieces of her skin missing or some shit like that. But I feel like Brienne's here for the long term, and I'm committing to that one now.
And you also mentioned Stannis, so we'll keep that in mind as well.
Yes, Stannis, watch your back. You've got Brienne tough after you, and she's seen the shadow with your face.
And Jen, Lady Gwyn, there's someone you wanted to see die, right?
Yeah, because I read the question is who do I think will die this season. And my who do I think was all the people I mentioned, possibly, plus, please God, Dario Naharis.
So we have a lot of good predictions. Hopefully we didn't make too many of you anxious for our predictions on who's going to die. If you consider us to be knowledgeable, somewhat expert on these predictions, so we can call ourselves experts. It's kind of a joke. But hopefully we're not scaring too many people with that.
Yeah, right.
The fact we change our minds every week should be some reassurance for your listeners.
Yeah. We're as anxious as a lot of you guys are. So thanks to Yolkboy and Lady Gwyn. I'm rushing to the end here, to the finish line. We're running out of time. So tell us what's coming up at Radio Westeros for you guys. There's something exciting.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you, listeners who haven't heard us, come and check out our podcast, radiowesteros.com. Come and give us a listen. We make these things for people like you, so give it a try. We have got an episode all about Sir Barristan Selmy, about his arc, about his knighthood, about Kingsguard. That'll be out probably by the time you hear this. It's coming out in the 24 hours after we record this, so it will be out soon. And cheers for listening. And do you want to say anything, Lady Gwyn?
No, I'm going to let Aziz wrap it up because I know we're running out of time.
Wrap it up.
Very happy to be here, though.
Okay, yeah, thanks for being here, guys. Great conversation.
It's great. Thanks for having us on. It's wicked. And send in all your questions, people, so we can make this a really good show. Definitely
send us more questions. You heard us integrate those questions into the show. We're going to keep doing that. So if you have good questions, good thoughts, just even a good prediction, just throw it at us. We'll good chance you'll get it mentioned in the show. Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who make the show possible from a financial standpoint. Thanks to everyone who spreads the show by word of mouth. That is a huge impact. Over the years, we have grown largely through word of mouth, mostly by just doing what we do and trying to be consistent and slowly getting better all the time. We try to make small improvements. So thanks to everybody. I don't have time to go through everyone individually because we're so short on time. But if you want to hear your name mentioned on the show, you can do that by sending us questions. You can also subscribe to us on Patreon or send us a regular donation through historyofwesteros.com. Click on the donate button. All the shopping links on the left or rather on the right side of the sidebar there, everything there anything there you can purchase at its regular price. Those merchants will share their profits with us. So it's a great way. It's a great win-win. You can support the show and get things that you were going to buy anyway. So I had a feature that I wanted to do at the end of this episode, but we don't have time. I'll save it for next time. It's a humor piece, so I'll just have to hold on to that. I'll keep that as a little mini spoiler teaser for next time around. So, folks, thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the show, and we will see you all next week. Valar Morghulis from Radio Westeros to History of Westeros. See you all next time. Thanks a lot.